Hey everybody, it's Tate with Roy's, and today I'm going to show you how to make a 2D Zelda-like combat system. Let's get started. First, let's create our character body for our character. So, add in a character body 2D, and I'm just going to rename this to player. And I'm going to add a couple of child nodes. First node I'm going to add is a sprite 2D because we will need to be able to see our character. The next node I'll be adding is a collision shape 2D, and that should be good. All right, now we're going to be adding our character sheet to our sprite 2D, and it's going to give us all this. So what we need to do is slim this down. To do that, we can head into animation and change our H frames, horizontal frames, and we have 8 horizontal frames, and we have 4 vertical frames. Now we can go into texture, change our filter to nearest, and if you see, you'll see the fine details now on our sprite. Perfect. Now let's go into our collision shape and add in a new rectangle shape. I'm just going to leave that as default. Now let's add in another node, an animation player, and let's start creating our character animation. To do this, let's create an animation, so new animation, and I'm just going to name this walk down. Perfect. Now, to add in our animation, we can head into our sprite 2D, and you'll see this key next to our frame. And so if I change our, wait, I need to change our values here. So I'm going to zoom in and change our values to 0.4 because we have 4 frames of walking animation. And I'm going to change our snap here to 0.1. Now we can click the frame button and this key right next to it, and you'll get this dialog pop up. You could just hit create, and it'll add our frame to our animation. Now I can do this a couple more times. So 1, 2, 3 to get all our walking animation in. So let's play this. That looks good. Now I'm going to do that for the rest of the animation. So I'm just going to skip ahead and you guys don't have to see that. Perfect. Now I got all our walking animation into our game. Now let's add our attack animation. To do that, we'll also do the same thing and create a new animation. And I'm just going to call this attack down. And now let's find our attack animation. So currently for me, it's on frame 5. And I know we have 3 frames of attack animation, so I'm going to change this to 0.3. And we're going to add in our frames of animation like we did before. So 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Now, what we're going to have to do is we're going to add another node as a player child. So I'm going to add in an area 2D, and I'm going to give this a collision shape as well. And I'm going to give it just a rectangle for this, a rectangle shape 2D. Now, what I'm going to be doing is we're going to be animating our collision shape to follow our sword. So if I go here and change the shape to be roughly the outline of our sword, now we can go into our transform and in our rectangle and click the keys next to our position and the size on these areas. So create and create. Now we have to follow our sword. So let's go 1 frame ahead and let's move this slider to follow our sword. This is good enough. I'm not going for perfection here. And click the keys again. Now let's move it 1 more frame and do the same thing again. So about here. And click the keys on position and size again. So now if we play our animation, we've got this nice collision following our animation. Again, I'm now going to go ahead and do that for all the frames of animation for our attacks on each side. There we go. Now we've got all our frames of animation. Wait, there's one missing here. Okay, the resize is missing here. I must have misclicked. I'm just gonna fix that really quickly. There we go. Oh, there we go. Now all our frames of animation are in. So if I play this, again, that looks nice. All right. Now, if you've noticed, now we have this area 2D and it's going to appear even on the walk cycles. And so we need to turn that off on the walk cycle. So go back to the start, click on your collision and just disable on and create. And we have to do this for all the walk cycles because we do not want our character attacking things while we're walking. And let's just also turn it on for our attack animations. Perfect. Now we can actually get into coding our combat and movement. So click on your player and attach a script. And make sure it's C#, and I'm not going to be using a template for this. So, great. So we're going to need a couple of global variables before we start programming our logic. So public const float character speed. And for now, I'll set this to about 150.0f. We're going to need to grab reference to our animation player because we're going to need to trigger animations through scripts. So export animation player, anim player, and then public int damage get private set. So this just allows other scripts to get the data but not set it, and we'll just set this equal to 1 for now. Private int health, and let's just set this equal to 5. Now we're gonna have to create a state machine for the direction our player is facing. So to do that, we can just public enum facing direction. We're creating essentially our own variable here. And add some brackets, and now we're going to give it 4 states, 4 directions our players can be facing. Up, down, left, and right. That's done. Now let's create our state variable. So I'm just going to keep it private, facing direction, and we're going to call it facing direction with just a lowercase f. And then equals new. And we're also going to create a singleton for our game, for our player script, so other scripts can access it fairly easily. So public player, actually public static player instance. Now let's create our first function. Public override void ready. And we're going to just instance equals this. This will means this script can only be in the scene once, and we'll be able to access it through this instance through other scripts, which is very nice and convenient, and cleans up your code a lot. All right, now let's create our physics process. Public override void physics process, and let's just delete the base here. We don't need that. Now let's start programming our movement. So first, we're going to want to create a vector 2. Velocity equals vector2.0. We're going to be setting this throughout the script. Now let's get our inputs. So vector2 direction. Oh, whoops. Need space there. Equals input dot get vector UI left, UI right, UI up, and UI down. What this does is it takes these inputs and gives us a vector 2. And so UI left and right will be on the x-axis, and UI up and down will be on the y-axis. And the nice thing about these is these vectors will only return 1 if this button is being pressed. So that is essentially just how we get all our inputs for our movement. Now let's actually create our movements script. So if direction does not equal vector2.0, what are we going to do? Well, if direction dot x is greater than 0, because again, this only returns a 1, and if we're pressing the right key, it our if we're pressing the right key, our direction dot x will be a 1, and if we're pressing the left, it'll be a -1. So if the direction is greater than 0, what do we want to do? We want to do nMPlayer dot play what we called our walk animation. In my case, this is walking to the right, so I'm going to call it walk right. Now we're going to have to do this a few more times. So I'm just going to copy this code and paste it 3 times. 1, 2. So if direction now is less than 0, whoops, means we're moving to the left. So we need to play the animation walk left. If direction dot y is greater than 0, Godot's backwards in this way, we'll be walking down. And if direction dot y is less than 0, come on, is less than 0, we'll be walking up. Perfect. Now we need to assign this to our velocity variable that we've made up here. So velocity equals direction dot normalized times by character speed. I just do this because I like to do it. It's just habit. This normalization essentially makes sure that everything in our direction variable is a 1. And so this is nice when you're moving to the side. It'll keep you from moving at a greater speed if you're moving at an angle versus if you're moving straight in one direction. It's very nice, and we'll be using this again later. And then let's assign our velocity. Velocity equals velocity. Perfect. Now we can run into our game and test our player out and make sure everything's working correctly. Let's save it. Come on. Oh, I forgot to move and slide, didn't I? Yep. Always remember to move and slide. Because I completely forgot to do that. I also forgot to assign the animation player, so make sure to do that. Okay, our animations are looking good. Now let's add in our combat, shall we? So back in our script, I'm going to put it above our direction. So I want it so that if you're swinging your sword, you can't move. So I'm going to make this an if what do I want? If input is action just pressed. Let's just do UI accept. So I believe that's the enter key or the space key. Whoop, screwed up. There we go. And we're going to change this to an else if, so these two things can't happen at the same time. So what do we want to do if we hit the attack key? Well, we need to get the direction that we're facing. So if facing direction, again, that variable we made up here, equals facing direction dot up, we're going to nMPlay dot play attack up. Again, I'm going to be pasting this 3 more times for each of the animations we can do. So if we're facing down, play attack down. If we're facing left, play attack left. And we're facing right, play attack right. Now, if you've noticed though, we've actually never set our facing direction state here. So we're going to actually have to do that. But we're not going to be doing it in code. I'm going to actually be doing it in our animation player. It's super nice. I'm going to keep coming back to this. So basically, what we can do is we can create. Actually, I need to export this, don't I? I'm going to change this to public and export this to the inspector so that we can edit it with our animation player. So let's do that and build. Now you can see that it's here. So in our animation player, let's do walk up. And now let's keep track of our walk up. So we're setting our variable right now. So animation player. Wait, what am I doing? Sorry, I got lost for a second. Walk down. Let's set it to walk down. Walk left. Let's set it to left. Walk right. Let's set this to right. Pretty simple. Now we've set our variable. Now let's test our script and see if it works as we hope it does. So if we're walking, and if we hit the enter key, we swing our sword. But there's one more problem. If I spam the attack button, we don't have anything to set this. We don't have anything to set this to not attack anymore. We're going to have to create another variable in a script to do that. So we're going to create one more export variable. So right here, I'm going to create an export public bool, and I'm going to call this is attacking. And I'm going to just set it to default false. Now, what I can do here is I can go into our attack function, our attack script, and just set this is attacking to true. And then I can say, and I can go into our movement script and I can say, and if we aren't attacking. But now I need to set this eventually to not be attacking, or we'll just be stuck in our attacking state forever. Well, animation player to the rescue. I'm gonna rely on this too much. So if we go into and build our project again, we'll have our attacking variable, and now we can just go into our attack, go to our final frame, and just make sure attacking isn't on. It's not going to be checked in any of our attack on the final frame. There we go. Now all our frames, all our final frames for our attack animations will set our is attacking to false once they have completed the animation. So let's test this again. Let's walk our player. Let's swing our sword. Actually, I should make this player a bit bigger. Let's just change the transform scale to like 2 times? 3 times. There, so you can see it easier. There we go. That's huge. But, so now we can swing at the same time. Oh wait, I forgot something. I need this velocity to be here. I need this velocity function to be here, or it'll always set this direction variable to it, and then it'll just run normally. There we go. Now let's run this. And now we can swing, and we can't do it at the same time. But now we have another issue. Watch our animation. It completes a full cycle before we stop moving. And I want it to stop as soon as I stop moving. That's another easy fix. Go into our script, our player script, and then we can type else if not is attacking. What do I want to do? I can just do n in player, and I can pause the playback. So this will pause it the moment we take our hand off the key. There you go. So we can swing, we can move, and that's basically going to be it for our player script. But I want to do an enemy now. We don't have anything to fight, and we need to make a basic enemy to test this. So let's create a new scene. I'm going to make it another character body. And I'm going to add a child of collision shape. Add another child of sprite 2D. And I'm going to add another child of an area 2D and give that area 2D a child of a collision shape. I'm not going to be making an insane enemy, but I'm just going to be making something that functions okay. So let's give our sprite 2D our icon to distinguish it from our character. And let's give it a collision shape of rectangle. Let's do that. And I'm going to put it below here so I can see it. And let's just scale it up to, we could do the full size, I think. There we go. I'm going to rename this to enemy. And I'm going to save our enemy. Oh, I didn't add a collision shape here. Yeah, I need to do that too. Add a collision shape here. And let's just increase it to not quite the borders, all of the borders. Now, let's attach a script to our enemy. I'm just going to call it enemy.cs. And now we need to get data from our player's sword swing to our enemy. And so we have these two areas, and these two areas can detect if one of them is in the other. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to our node and attach signals. Signals are great because signals essentially are always listening and will fire. So if our sword enters this area 2D collision shape that we've set here, this one right here, it'll fire and it'll give us data and say, hey, something entered, do something. So we can just go here and click area entered and attach it. Connect. Right click and you can click connect. Now we want to connect it to our enemy script. I'm going to copy this for future use. And let's click connect. Now let's go back into our script and type private void. And I'm going to paste that name I copied earlier. And it takes in an area 2D. Again, if we go back, you can see here, it passes in an area 2D into our function. And I'm going to call this col for collider, essentially, collision. So now this function will run every time we hit the enemy with our weapon. So I want the enemy to have some health. So int health equals 3, 4. And so every time it hits, I want our health to decrease by the amount the player has. So if you remember, we had this instance variable here. This is going to allow us to access our damage variable that we set here easily from our enemy script. So here I can just say health minus equals player dot instance dot damage. And so this will always reference our player script, so we can change this damage variable to anything throughout gameplay, and this will always go by our latest variable. This is a very nice method. Now, let's say if our health is less than or equal to 0, our enemy needs to die, so we should just queue free. Now, let's test our enemy. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to create a new scene. And I'm going to put in our enemy. Oh, whoops. I attached the enemy script. I'm going to put in our enemy. And I'm going to put in our player. Let's move them to more on the camera. And let's save this as main. And let's just run this scene quickly. Let's just make sure our enemy takes damage. Let's walk over to him. We're kind of slow. Swing, hit him a couple times. He dies. But that's not that fun of an enemy. And Zelda games oftentimes have enemies knock back if you hit them. So let's add in some knockback. Let's create another variable, and I'm gonna call this int knockback amount equals 500. You'll see why later. um, and now we need to get our knockback position. So we want to knock back. I'm gonna go in here actually. We always want to knock away from the player. So wherever the player is, we want to go the opposite direction. There's actually a very nice thing we can do to get this effect. So let's create a vector 2. And we're going to call this knockback direction. And we're going to equal it to a couple things. We're going to equal it to in brackets position. So this is our current enemy's position minus player.instance.position. This is going to allow us to, this knockback will always go in the opposite direction of our player. Now, we're going to be normalizing this again, because as it stands, if you didn't normalize this, the knockback would have increased speed away at an angle from the player versus directly somewhere else. So, like, you'd get varying knockback amounts. And then we're just going to multiply it by our knockback amount. And that's all we need here. And I'm just going to put this on a new line so that you can read it better. We can set our velocity to our knockback direction. And we're going to have to create a physics process, public override, void physics process. And we're going to have to move and slide, or else our character won't move. And I've already made that mistake once in this video, and I don't want to do it again. All right, let's test this. So if we swing, he goes away. But he doesn't stop. He doesn't stop at all. We need to allow him to stop. This is going to be a nice, easy trick, actually. To stop, we can use tweening. We've already done a whole video on tweening, so I'm not going to be explaining it in an incredible amount of detail, but here's what we can do. Tweening is like a way to do quick animations through math, and it's very nice. So let's create a tween. Tween equals getTree dot create tween. Now we can tween our velocity. So tween dot tween property. We're tweening ourselves. So this, and then velocity. We want to modify velocity. I want our velocity to go to 0. Vector2 dot 0 in 0.3 seconds. Let's try this again. So now if we run our script and we hit our enemy, he's going to be knocked back, always away from our player, and he's going to stop being knocked back eventually. But as it stands right now, our player doesn't take damage. Let's let our player take damage. We're going to need to modify our player scene a little bit. I'm going to rename this to sword. And I'm going to add another area 2D. And I'm going to call this hitbox. And let's add another collision shape. And let's give this collision shape, I don't know. I'm just going to do a rectangle. It's very boring, but it's very decent. And we're going to make this bigger than our collider. I'm also going to set our hitbox, or set our sword, to not collide with anything on layer 1. So it won't be on layer 1, it'll be on it'll check for layer 2 in our collision on our sword. Because otherwise we'd be hitting ourselves and we'd be doing damage to ourselves. There are other ways to solve this, but this is a pretty simple one. Now we also need to actually change our enemy's area 2D to be on layer 2 and be looking for layer 1, which is where our sword is on. Now we have our hitbox. We're going to need to attach our hitbox to our character again. So, like before, we can go into Node and attach our area 2D to our player script. Come on. There we go. I'm going to copy this again and connect. Let's go back into our player script and create that function. Private void, pass in an area 2D, and we're going to call it collision again. Oh wait, this is on the wrong script. Let me just fix that. It should not be there. We need this on the player script. Sorry. There we go. So again, once we hit an enemy, this will fire. I'm not going to be doing anything too interesting with it, but let's just say if we hit an enemy, what do we want to do? Let's gd.print, and we're going to just say damage taken for now. And we'll lower our health by 1. Like, we can always access this enemy script. Actually, let's do that. Let's give their enemy a damage value. Let's give it a public int damage. Let's give it a get and private set, so it can't be set by any other script. And let's give our damage equal to 1. Okay. Now let's access it from our player script. So let's do clum dot get parent enemy dot damage, and let's just health minus equals whatever the damage on our enemy is. So this is just grabbing the script from our parent, because if you see, we're interacting with the area 2D, so the parent is enemy, which has the enemy script attached. And so this is just grabbing that script and letting us take that damage from it. So let's run this to see if this works. Okay, now we've actually run into another issue, is that our enemy doesn't know what to do. It just automatically collides and takes damage from our player, so we actually need to change our enemy script a little bit. What we can do is we can use our groups method. So we can put our sword into a player group. We can put our sword into a player group, and then we can go into our enemy script, and then we can say at the top of our area 2D, if collider.isInGroup player, and let's say if it's not in the group player, we're going to return. Do nothing. If anything but the sword hits it, do nothing. That's what that line says. So let's go back in, let's test it to see if that fixes our problem. And I'm in the wrong scene again. Oh, wait. Whoops. There we go. All right, let's run to our enemy again. And we don't take damage, but we don't seem to be colliding with it in our hitbox script. And I'm not exactly sure why. We should be colliding with it. Oh, wait, I know why. We're not looking for it on mask 2. Okay, let's save this, run it. Run the right scene. And let's run, and we should be taking damage now. There we go. Damage taken. So we can do that as much as we want. We could swing, we can hit it. It can get caught on us. Oh, don't know why that happened. Let's try and get that again. Okay. That's an error. That shouldn't be happening. Let's go into our enemy. Let's go into our collision shape. And let's say can't collide with anything on... Where's our collision? Oh, let's change our collision to it can only collide on 2 here. That still allow us. Yeah, that worked. All right. I think that's all for this video. I think this video is long enough. I think we covered enough. That's a basic combat system. Obviously, there are ways to expand it, like that we could have the player take damage and do a hitbox. For that, you could just do another state machine, kind of like this one is in the player, and then make the player get knocked back like an enemy. But that's all for this video. If you got anything from this video, I'd appreciate a like. I'd really appreciate a like. But that's it. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.